I stand here. Great. Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's PSU Transportation Seminar. My name is and I'm the Associate Director for the Transportation Research and Education Center here at Portland State University, and I will be introducing and moderating today's seminar. So our PSU Transportation Seminars have been a tradition since 2000. These seminars are once again being held live on Portland State University's urban campus, located on the ancestral lands of the Multnomah, Clackamas, Tumwater, and Watlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge that we are here because of the sacrifices forced on the indigenous ancestors of this place, to remember these communities, and to honor their legacy, lives, and descendants. If you're in downtown Portland, you can still catch the Dakota Modern. It's a showcase of art by Oscar Howe, one of the 20th century's most innovative Native American painters at the Portland Art Museum. And this exhibition runs through this Sunday, May 14th. Today, we are pleased to have Basem, Elazzabi, and Tammy Lee presenting on celebrating 20 years of Portal. So Tammy works on a variety of projects for Trek, including documentation, data synthesis, analysis, and visualization, supporting ongoing work with Portal and BikePed PORTAL. Tammy received a BS in genetics and plant biology from UC Berkeley before earning her PhD in environmental and natural resource sciences from Washington State University. And prior to joining Trek, she worked as a data scientist for a political digital media consulting firm. When not working, she's either hiding in the forest or experimenting in the kitchen. And we also have Basem, who is the head of programming and development for Portal and BikePed PORTAL projects with Trek. He is responsible for maintaining and developing the database and the infrastructure of both projects. He also does various data analysis and visualization tasks. Basem received a PhD in computer science from Portland State University with a focus on database and data analysis. He has almost 20 years of experience in system analysis and big data. His main research topics focus on how to facilitate data analysis for typical and non-technical data analysts. I think that's a really important point. One of the main research topics that he works on is how to build the next generation data analysis ecosystem, in which institutions, both government and private, can easily store their massive data and have easy access to data analysis tools to support and improve data-driven decision-making. Here's a preview of a couple of upcoming Trek events. If you are in Portland, we would encourage you to sign up for the Ann Niles Active Transportation Luncheon on May 24th. It's a great opportunity to actually connect with some of the local transportation professionals, as well as the general public. And then the final transportation seminar for spring is on May 25th, and we have Peter Kuntz with the Portland Bureau of Transportation talking about confessions of a traffic engineer, how the MUTCD impacts everything. Just a quick overview of the seminar today. You can expect that our speakers will present for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A after. We'll be receiving Q&A through the feature on your control panel. And if you're here in person, you can raise your hand and we'll hear your questions. If we run out of time for your questions, we will give our speaker the opportunity to email written responses or any questions left unanswered. We also have enabled closed captioning. So you must click on the CC feature on your control panel to view them. We are also recording today's webinar. It will be available on our website later today, along with the presentation slides. And then if you are tracking professional development hours, the webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuation credit. So that was a long introduction. But with that, I will hand it over to Tammy and Basem to talk about Portal. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Okay, so great. So before we get into the talking about Portal, I'd really like to spend the time to acknowledge everyone that's worked on this project. So it's 20 years worth of work, and that means there have been that many people involved with it. It is a publicly supported project, and it's also, you know, in the support of our regional transportation agencies with everybody that's worked on it, from researchers, faculty, staff, graduate students, agency personnel as well. You know, and in particular, Robert Tammy, who started the project, and faculty who has managed the project for 15 years. And if I have not, if you're at home and you're looking at the slide looking for your name and you've been a part of that project, I sincerely apologize. I just went through a lot of the previous publications in history trying to find everybody that's worked on it or has been acknowledged. So you can email me if you want your name added. I'm happy to do that. So for some of you might be wondering, what is Portal? If you're at home, you can easily type in this URL, portal.its.pdx.edu, and you can look at that instead of looking at my slide. It is a publicly funded project. I cannot stress this enough. We cannot do this project without the support of our regional agencies. It is also a publicly available centralized data repository. And in today's terms, you can call it a data lake. That's what everyone's using. Base, a data reservoir. I can come up with a lot of sort of phonological or oceanographic terms to make this work out for you. However, I like to think of this as more as a data ecosystem, because it's not just a database, right? And so you have your database with all this data that comes with multiple agencies, from highways data to arterial data to transit data and weather data. And what happens is, on top of that sort of database that we have a layer of bunch of pages and applications and tools for people to interact with it. So they're able to utilize it and also, you know, give us feedback on how to improve the system. So really, you know, you can think of it as more of an ecosystem. At the moment, we are at 20 terabytes. It's fluctuated over the past year or so, but currently it's 20 terabytes from data. So let's give a little brief history of Portal, since we're looking back at 20 years worth of work. Let's think about the mid-1990s. So some of you might be reminiscing about what CD you might be buying next in the mid-90s, but you know, there's the transportation community that probably wasn't thinking about that. And instead we're thinking about, hey, here's the intelligent transportation systems. We should be, you know, we recognize that there's all this data that's coming in. How can we archive it to make it useful for future and operations management? So then in 1998, officially the FHWA issued an addendum to the ITS plan for an archive data usage service. 2003, Robert Tammy has an idea for Portal. And then in 2004, the first data source is from ODOT, and it's from 436 inductive loops. And here are some screenshots of what the interface looks like in 2005. And yeah, it kind of looks sort of like ODOT, that's definitely 2005 sort of like interface, the font and everything. But you have to also recognize, like, this is 2005. This is actually pretty amazing with the tools that they had to be able to demonstrate, you know, all this data that's coming in. 2009, WashDOT joined with their highways data. 2010, 2013, we start getting arterial data from the city of Portland and Park County respectively. 2016, 2015, we also start getting length data from both ODOT and WashDOT as well. And then since then, we've actually had a lot more additional applications that have also been built. We have about 3 transit dashboards, 1 for C-Tran and 2 for TriMet. We also have a travel time page as well. We also have documentation to go along with all these pages. So if you're confused at any point on how to use Portal, please go to the documentation page. And in addition to that, we've also developed documentation to be able to utilize the API that we have as well. So next I'm going to do a quick demo so you can see how Portal is used. If we go to the travel time page, this is already done like sort of preemptively in case, you know, worst case scenario during a live demonstration it doesn't work out. So in this case, right here, you can sort of select your route. And in this case, we selected I-5 going southbound in Washington. And then here, the start date is this week. And in this case, you can, I selected a yearly comparison and only did weekdays. You can manipulate these additional tools if you want to. In addition to that, we also have like these little eyes right here for information, in case you're kind of curious of how these different features are supposed to be used. And once again, you can also go to the documentation page. So if you scroll down, what you can see here is the yearly comparison for the month of May for the travel time. So you have 2003 in the dark, and then the lightest is 2020 of May. So you can see how travel time along that corridor was, you know, roughly a minute, but now back in 2020, over time, you can see the travel time increasing down that corridor and like I-5 southbound. And you can see this one through this year for me, you get that sort of peak morning travel time slowdown, which is really interesting. In addition to this page, you can also add and remove sample count data, and there's also reliability data as well. So this is one way to sort of look at Portal to do these like multi-year comparisons with travel time. Next, another page that we have that's actually used a lot more frequently is the stations page. So you select your station, there's like a map on the first page. And then, so then what happens is, in this case, I selected going to southbound I-5. And in this particular situation, I picked the month of April right here, here's your start end date. I selected weekdays. And then for PM peak, I selected 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then the quantities are defaulted to speed and vehicle lanes per hour, but as the drop down, you can see all the other metrics that are available. In this case, I selected a 1 hour resolution and decided to group it as yes. And then once you click update charts, you can scroll down. And here you have the month of April weekday hourly traffic volume. So this is the volumes right here and the speed up here. You can also toggle these if you wanted to, the legends to turn off and on different metrics as well. On the stations page as well, you're able to download data. You can download the data that's featured on the graph, or you can download all data. So it's the lane by lane data, which is, you can't really get that, and it's not common to get the lane by lane distribution data. If there is ramp data that is also available, the ramp data is also included in the download all data. There's also metadata that is also included. So the stations page, what you see today, it's not the same as what it will be in about 6 months. So we're actually in the process of rebuilding this page to make it more functional based on the feedback that we've gotten from our users. So at the moment, you can't really get like, you can't do a multi-temporal comparison like we can in the station on the travel time page. So we're going to try to build that functionality in the rebuild of it. We've had a lot of requests to be able to sort of see, oh, well, it was like this month, what was it like last month versus what was it like a year ago. So that will be built in as one of the features. The other one is it's kind of nebulous how to find the rank. We get questions about that all the time. So one of the additional functionalities is to be able to show which stations have ramp data, and then also be able to maybe visualize that as well. So it's going to be an ongoing process in terms of how to improve this page for our end users. And our end users aren't just agency personnel, right? Again, it's students, it's researchers, it's general public, it's consultants. So really we're trying to hear and listen to what our end users would like to improve the functionality of this page. And with that, I will turn it over to Basem, who will start to look at the portal and describe how and why it works.
I'll give a quick overview of how Portal generally works internally. So we have mainly 5 layers. Those are just the layers that control the whole infrastructure of portal and make portal work the way it works. I'll go into details in a little bit, but I just want to mention that all of this infrastructure is hosted on premises at PSU and managed by the computer action team, PSU, also known as the CAT team. So the first layer, which is basically where everything starts, this is where the data arrives. We call it the data feed layer. And basically the way we get the data into Portal is we usually have 3 methods. So the first one is where the agency has an API, and we have something called the data eater, which is written in Python. So the data eater goes into the API, communicates with the API, and gets the data into Portal. The next method that we have is where the agency has a server, and they give us access to that server, and we go there, and we fetch the data into Portal. The last method that we use is where the agency has an application, and we give them an access to Portal, and where they can dump their data in a designated area. And then the data eater goes in and digests that data from that particular area. So now that the data is in Portal, the next goes into the next layer, which is the data processing layer. And this is basically, and so when the data comes in different formats and structures. And so what we do is the first step is to extract the data that we need from the data that we get from the feeds. And then it goes into the data cleaning. Now, generally, we don't do any data cleaning at Portal. We rely on the agencies themselves to clean the data. There are a lot of reasons, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But the basic cleaning that we do is basically just logical stuff. So if it's not logical, we usually eliminate that data. So once the data is clean, the next step is to reformat it, restructure it, and get it ready to being stored inside Portal. So all of these scripts that we run on Portal are written in Python. So now the data is ready, the next step is putting it into the storage. Right? The storage layer is mainly consists of the Postgres database, and within that database we have we have a bunch of layers basically. The first one is we call the raw data layer. This is basically where the data that we feeds gets stored, and in addition to that, we also store it in files just to archive them in case something catastrophic happens. We have a way to recover the data. Now, at this point, when working with the raw data is very inefficient. It's very slow. It's quite tedious, and so we employ a bunch of methods to try to speed up the process and make it far more efficient. And so the first thing that we do is we aggregate the data. And so, like, for example, at different resolutions. So for example, the freeway data comes in at a 20-second resolutions. What we do is as it comes in, we aggregate the data in 5-minute resolutions, 15-minute resolutions, 1-hour resolutions, and we have 1-day resolution. And when we do data analysis, we look at the requirements for that analysis, and we say, okay, what resolution that works well with that data analysis, and that we use that resolution. We don't use the raw data itself. The other thing that we do is we materialize the data. So that's basically when we have a very expensive computation that we have to do, we pre-compute that and we store it. And obviously, so that speeds up the process a lot. So when we do that analysis, and that requires this kind of computation, instead of doing it on the fly, we basically just use the pre-computed one. One thing to mention is that we try to do our data analysis as much as we can on the fly and in real time, because that's much more efficient and it costs less. But at the same time, when we come to these situations where you can't do it in real time, so we have to pre-compute this, But at the same time, when we pre-compute or materialize data, we have to store it, and so that takes storage space. And so you have to like weigh in the pros and cons with, okay, you're storing this much data, how much you're getting out of it in terms of computation cost. The next thing we do is that we have metadata layer. So when you work with data, with the raw data itself, it's not very informative. So basically like the high freeway data, you get like is a detector number, it collects this amount of volume, it detected this amount of volume at that amount of speed, that average speed. So that by itself is not very informative or useful information. But what is useful is for you to know that that detector is located on this highway, on this street, and it has this type and on this lane. So that becomes a very useful thing to use when you analyze the data. Now, the last thing that we do is indexing. So basically indexing is the difference between getting your data analysis results within hours or even days versus getting it within seconds or milliseconds. Now, obviously, we can index everything, but indexes cost a lot in terms of space, and so we don't index everything. But again, this is a trade-off that we have to figure out how to what to index and what not to index, and how much we're getting out of that index. Now, all of this is stored on one server, and so if that goes down, basically we lose everything. And so what we do to combat that is we have a backup database Postgres instance, and so this is basically like where it's like a clone. So everything that happens in the main instance happens in the second instance. And so if the first one goes down, the second one, the backup kicks in and it takes over. Now, as I mentioned earlier, all of this is hosted on premises at PSU. And so if something catastrophic happens to PSU, God forbid, we basically lose everything. And so one thing that we do is weekly, we basically, the errors and stuff like weekly, we go and like back up the database and the files, and we store them on cloud on AWS. And so this way, if something catastrophic happens, at least we only lost that. At most, we would be losing like a week data. So now that the data is stored, obviously maintaining all these layers, it doesn't happen by magic. So this is where the data maintenance layer comes into play. And so I'm not going to go into details, but the main purpose of this layer is to make sure that the data in these different storage layers are as complete as possible and as correct as possible. And so once we have that sorted out, the next step is to figure out how to utilize the data. So storing data for the purpose of storage is used, it doesn't make sense. And so we need to provide a way for our users to access the data and utilize it. And this is where the user interface layer comes into play. And so the way we build this layer is we first start with our goals. So we see what exactly we want to achieve. I'll talk about that in a little bit more later in more detail. But generally, we have a goal that we want to achieve, and we have data that we can use to achieve that goal. And usually the data that we have doesn't achieve the goal right away. And so we have to figure out a data analysis process to go from the data that we have into that final goal. And this is where the data analysis layer is. And so at this layer, basically, we do a lot of data manipulations and data transformations to get to the final form that we want to serve to our users. And then comes in the question of, well, how do we serve those results to our end users? And this is where our websites come into play. Usually when you talk about website, you have two components. You have a backend component, which is the servers, and you have the front end component, which is basically your browser or what you see on the browser. So the backend component is mainly Python and Django. We also have the old website, which is written in PHP, and we're trying to migrate from everything from PHP to Django. So the front end part is the usual suspects. We have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But we also build our dashboards, some examples that you saw earlier in the demo. We use a bunch of other libraries like jQuery, iCharts, those are that little charts that you saw. We also use open layers and open street maps to show the maps or visualize things on the map. On top of that, we also have an API layer, which allows other applications to connect to Portal and pull data from there. You can also go to the website and download the data from there. And so all of these layers that you see is basically so that at the end, what provides access to the user. So the user basically interacts with those, the final ones. So in addition to all these 5 main layers, we also have logs where we keep track of what's happening inside portals. If something wrong happens, we can debug that problem and trace it and figure out where things go wrong. So this is generally basically the, I would say, the blueprint for building a data archive or a data lake. And so if you're planning on doing something like that, I would say these are pretty much the main components that you need to focus on. So now the question is, what are the challenges that we have in running a system like this? So in the database world, we have something we call the big 3 V's. So we have volume, velocity, and variety. So volume is basically the more data you have, the amount of data that you have in a database, and the more data you have, the more challenging it becomes to manage that data and utilize that data. Velocity is basically the speed at which the data is coming in or going out of your database. So the faster, the higher the speed is, the more challenging it becomes to manage that data. Variety is basically when you're trying to combine different types of data sets to for a specific data analysis. And the more variety you have is the more challenging it becomes to manage that data. And so each one of those dimensions is a problem in and of itself, or is a challenge in and of itself. But when you're in a situation where you're trying to combine multiple dimensions, now the difficulty level grows exponentially. And so this is what we have at Portal, is we're managing a large data and that keeps growing over time with a lot of variety. And also we have like relatively high speed. The speed at this point is not that problematic at this point, but maybe in the future it will be. So this is by no means is a trivial problem to solve. So it's quite challenging. And on top of that, we have to manage all of this and run the system with high efficiency and high reliability. Now all of this doesn't come cheap, it's quite expensive, and so storage costs and computation costs is always a challenge and something quite difficult to manage. And this is where we need funding, basically. I mean, we're glad that we have and lucky to have the support of our partners who are interested in funding Portal for as long as they did. But at the same time, when you're working, when the project is based on funding, you run into this problem where you're always trying to find a balance between fulfilling our stakeholders' needs, which we're more than happy to do. But at the same time, you have the needs of maintaining and developing the system, and that becomes this balance. Trying to figure out this balance is quite challenging as time goes, especially when you have a limited amount of funding to work with. The next challenge is that we're constantly dealing with is finding the right people with the right set of skills and expertise to work on Portal with the amount of funding that we have. To combat that, we work with students. But the thing with students is that we have to do a lot of training, which we're more than happy to do. But the thing about students is they graduate, and they graduate, we have to start this cycle all over again. So Something to keep in mind. The last thing I want to mention is maintaining the feeds, the data feeds. We work with a lot of agencies. Each one of them have their own protocol for how they collect data and how they send it to us. They have their own departments, their own data centers, and so trying to manage all of these feeds at the same time and making sure that our data, the data portal, is as complete as possible is pretty challenging. So now the question is how Portal succeeded for all these years. And so before we talk about how, we should talk about how we succeeded, we should talk about how others failed. Usually what we see is that agencies, they have funds and to collect certain type of data. And so they spend that funding on buying detectors or sensors and installing them. And once they do, the next thing they spend money on building the data center to collect the data. And then comes the third question, the third step, which is trying to figure out how to utilize them. And that's basically where everyone gets stuck and fails, or almost everyone. And the reason why that is because the way you store the data determines how you can use it and what you can do with it. And so these agencies, they spend money and budget on storing the data, and when they come to utilizing the data, they realize that it's very difficult, it's very challenging, it costs a lot, and sometimes it's just not sustainable to continue to support that project. And so what we do is we have what we call the top-bottom approach. And so we start with the user and we try and understand what kind of problems that they go through, and what is it that we can do to help. And so we conduct a lot of meetings with our stakeholders and our users to try and understand their needs, and also try and figure out how we can improve our system to solve, at least to help solve their problems. We also participate in regional transportation meetings so that we are aware of the challenges that they go through and see what we can do. Now, once we get an understanding, the next step is to figure out what use cases that we should focus on. And so we go back and forth with our stakeholders and users and try and prioritize what use cases that we need to focus on. Once we figure out what the use cases are, the next step is to come up with a design for an application or a user interface that would help with those use cases. And so again, we go back and forth with our users and stakeholders and come up with, figure out what the right design would be. Once we figure out what the right design is, the next step is to figure out what is the right data that we need to work with to support this design. And so this step usually involves trying to figure out what type of data that we need, what structure should the data be in, what kind of quality that we need to work with, what kind of resolution that would make more sense for this kind of use case. And once we figure that out, the next step is to look at our database and see what kind of data sources that can support this goal. We're not quite, at this point, we're not looking for an exact data that would give us what we're trying to achieve. But what we're looking for is a data set that has the potential to get us to that point. And so this usually involves, like I said earlier, figuring out how to analyze the data, to manipulate it and transform it and get it to that final goal. And so if we don't have that data, we usually look at our agencies who has that kind of data and see if we can get that data into Portal. And that basically we go through, we have those three methods and we go through the steps that we went through earlier. Once we have the data in, obviously we go through the data processing stage, as I mentioned earlier, cleaning data, converting data, and aggregation and all that kind of stuff. Once we have the data, obviously the next step would be to implement and the application of the interface that we designed in step number 3. And so one thing I want to mention here is that at Portal we don't try to implement or build a monolithic system that can do everything. We treat things case by case, and we build dashboards and applications that are customized for that use case. It makes it a lot easier and much more efficient to maintain the system over time. And obviously, and once we're done with that, we basically go back to step number one and we repeat the process and we repeat the cycle basically. And this is how Portal developed throughout the years, is by repeating the cycle over and over. And so I would say 80% of the success of Portal basically is because of this top bottom approach. And so if you're gonna get anything out of this talk, is this top bottom approach. The other things that I would say are a main factor that contributed to the success of Portal is having the right combination of people with the right set of skills. You need to have, so when you work with Portal, you run into a lot of research problems, and so it's not a trivial thing to know how to solve a certain thing. So you need people with the right mindset that can innovate, that can try and solve problems that nobody else has solved, or for which there is no existing solution, I would say. But at the same time, you don't want to live in this theoretical world where you come up with all these ideas, but when you use them in practice, they just don't work. So you need also people with the practical mindset so that can ground those theoretical ideas into practice. And the last thing I want to mention is having the right environment and the support for the project. Like I mentioned earlier, we're very lucky to have PSU to support this project for as long as it did, and continue to do so. And also we're very lucky to have our partners, the transportation agencies that are willing and interested in funding this project for as long as it did. So like I said, it's a very expensive project to run. If you don't have funding, it's going to be a very big struggle. So what is next for Portal? We're currently working on this generation Portal. We don't currently support real-time data analysis, but we kind of do like real-time-ish. It's like at the 20-second mark. A lot of people don't consider that real time, but it's not a big challenge to manage data with a 20-second, I would say, frequency. But if you're going to deal with real-time data, where we might end up having to deal with the velocity aspect of the data, and at that point, we're going to have another layer of complexity added to Portal, and it's going to probably be a lot more challenging. The other thing that we're thinking of, that we're working on, is to figure out how to make Portal a transportation data hub for transportation agencies across the country. So currently, what we see is that each transportation agency, they do their own thing, they create their own data centers, they have their own people, and it's just a very inefficient ecosystem, and just trying to, for all these departments to connect with each other and communicate with each other and exchange data with each other, it's a very inefficient process. And so by having like a data hub where everything goes, like Portal, I think this is going to make things far more efficient, especially in this day of like connected vehicles and big data and all that. And I think it will make data-driven decision making a lot easier. Tammy, you want to talk about it?
Like in the next sort of 5 years, we're also planning to expand and add to Portal. So in light of TISMO and being more equity focused, we have our future funding is also looking into expanding Portal in terms of adding additional data, not just transportation data like car counts, volume, safety, or speed, but also like adding some additional layers. So if you're looking at a particular corridor, you're like, great, this is the corridor, these cars, but you want to provide additional context as to what's going on. And we also want to be able to add safety relief. You can't really think about transportation without understanding how it intersects with other disciplines, such as community-based health issues as well. So we're hoping to be able to add additional data layers that aren't necessarily quote unquote transportation, but definitely help provide that additional context to be able to understand what's going on in a specific area. So that could be socioeconomic type data like census stuff, safety related data. We're really going to start working on figuring out how to put that in. I know safety data is just kind of like its own problem to sort of smooth out. Also stuff like facilities data, like, yeah, we know it's a highway, or we know that there's it's an arterial, but you know, to get a little bit more information. So we have another project that we run that's BikePed Portal, and in BikePed Portal, part of the metadata is including these additional attributes, like, oh, like what's the functional classification, what's the speed limit over that particular area. So to be able to add some additional information would, I think, would really make Portal a lot more, would just fill it out a lot better. In addition to that, so we've always primarily worked with, you know, our user group and people with our agencies and faculty members and researchers, but what we really haven't done very well, and what we're looking forward to doing in the future is also creating an advisory committee of community-based organizations. So, you know, if you look at Portal and where the data is, like there's a huge gap, right, in like Eastern Portland. Or in East Portland, and it's like, well, you know, like, is our data helping those communities or is it not? So hopefully we can, you know, reach out to the community and understand like what are our data gaps, or what can we do to help start bridging those data gaps to help other people understand what's going on in the community with transportation. In addition to that, we're also next several years work on sort of integrating Portal and BikePed Portal to develop a sort of a toolbox to help bridge the whole like vehicle centric and then the sort of multimodal aspect of that. So we really want to also be able to figure out a way to create a tool that will be really helpful to get that sort of bigger picture multimodal ecosystem as well. So that's actually really exciting. And we'd like to also, so as we near the end of our talk, we'd like to talk about our lesson plan.
So I think for all these years, the one thing that, like I said earlier, if there's one thing that you can get out of this talk is this top-bottom approach to develop a data lakes. Like you're interested in creating your own data lake or data archive. I think knowing this top-bottom approach is very important. Like I said earlier, the next thing would be is to find the right combination of people and like research, a balance between research mindsets and the practical mindsets. The last thing for me that I want to mention is public cloud solutions and infrastructures are not the answer to every problem. So it's like the buzz nowadays, whenever you hear an agency collecting data, it's always, oh, it's the cloud, just put it in the cloud. And it's like this magical solution, and it's not. We've done a bunch of studies across the years, and every single time we come up with the conclusion that it's very inefficient and it's very expensive compared to doing on-premise infrastructure. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain use cases where cloud solutions are perfect fit for that, but building a data archive or a data lake is not one of them. Oh, but that English too.
Another some additional lessons learned going forward is that communication and relationship building is actually really super important. So I mean, like we have all our end users and trying to reach out to them and trying to figure out, oh, does this tool work well for you? Does it not? What can we do to improve it? So it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of communication, a lot of emails, and a lot of emails that are always nagging. So it's really it's as I'm an introvert, this is the part of my job that I'm okay doing. So and then also, the relationship building, it's back to myself, but we have a graduate student and then another student that works with us, but we really do we really do make it a point to try to engage with all the other students as well, right? So we're working with capstone groups to sort of help look at other products that we can, or applications that we can build and hopefully integrate into into Portal or BikePed portals. It's working with them, it's working with the computer science department, it's working with, you know, the data engineering class to figure out, hey, here's this new problem with signals data. Like, what can you do with it? And having our students work with that as well to sort of figure out, you know, if we don't have that time or expertise, we can have other people work on it as well. And so they have these real life skill sets, and applications and opportunities to work with big data sets as well. In addition to that, like, you really need to have an adaptive management sort of approach. I think that's the sort of a natural resource science term. But you know, that whole top bottom approach, like you're constantly reiterating, you're constantly learning, you're constantly having to adapt as well. So being able to do that and you know, stepping out of your comfort zone, that's also needed. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tammy and Basem. So for those viewing the webinar, Basem and Tammy, for those viewing the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A panel. And then think about your questions because I'll call on you here in the audience. But I do have a question for you, so I'll start off. So thinking about the trends that are happening right now and the impact of ChatGPT on writing papers, I never realized like AI would have such an influence on papers. What do you think the influence of AI and machine learning will be on data analytics as well as Portal perhaps?
I think it's still early to for ChatGPT and AI to be as useful as humans. But maybe in the future, I mean, it's just the technology is not there in terms of excuse me, in terms of AI being able to utilize the data itself. So it's gonna take a lot of time to build that infrastructure. And another thing is, the biggest thing with trying to figure out how to work with data is the context. And so you can give the same data to different people and they will conclude completely different things and they will see completely different things. And so trying to make that context available to AI is going to be very difficult. I mean, currently it's not available to humans, let alone to AI. And so this is, I think, is going to be the challenge for AI. I mean, I think AI can currently do like simple stuff, but like to get into like the really complicated stuff, especially when you're dealing with variety, like have a bunch of data sets and you try to how to combine them in a certain way and find a common ground between them so that you can get the final data analysis or the final result that you want. That's a very difficult, challenging problem to do for AI, at least that is. That's it. That's your question.
Sure. Tammy, any thoughts on this?
No, I really haven't thought about it. I'm just kind of pushing that off.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on integrating outside sources for research approaches. So things like, you know, census data or smart location database are ways that you integrate those sorts of data sources with some of your data and use those to contextualize or output different data sets.
Yeah, this is what Tammy talked about earlier with the equity part, is to try and add other types of data sources that are not transportation so that we can add context and try to make use of that transportation data outside of just transportation and planning, just to make people's lives better and make it more equitable, I guess.
Yeah, so if you're like looking in like a highly congested area along an arterial or maybe along the freeway, just sort of like, it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of congestion. So who is actually like not benefiting that? Because, you know, with congestion, there's traffic, with high volume, you know, there could be more accidents. The air quality is worse. So, you know, that's great, but if you don't know who's living in that area, then it's kind of, you know, you don't put a face in sort of like that the numbers at the end of the day, like who are you really benefiting? So being able to add that contextual data would be great. But then if you're thinking of asking about like third-party data sources from like other sensors, I don't know if you're asking that too.
Sure, I mean, yeah, how hard is that?
Well, I mean, no, third-party data is already hard enough to sort of like get the agreement to be able to show it. But I think I have ideas, but I'm not gonna comment on them because I don't really understand the full legal implication of different data sources. I do know that these third-party data sources will use our data to validate their stuff, so I actually just focus on that.
So some, along those lines, Tammy, which, and this is a question from online, which local or regional data sensor sources are not yet in Portal, but you wish were included in Portal?
Oh, arterials data would be really helpful.
What do you mean by arterials?
Just like
data?
an intersection, perhaps, more data that represents like East Portland and other areas as well would be helpful. Kind of really excited to see what the data engineering course here has been working on with the ODOT signals data to see how useful that is, or a better way to store it. So one of the challenges with the signal data is just so much data. You're just constantly generating data. And the challenge is like, well, what do you save? What do you store? How do you aggregate it? What's useful? So that I think would be really neat to sort of practice.
Great, and then this one is for Basem. What were or are the major problems that you discovered when using cloud providers for data lakes? So just expand on that a little bit.
Okay, so when you're trying to build a data lake, like, as we described earlier, there are a bunch of components to this, and trying to make the same components run on a cloud system is going to be very expensive. So if we just take what we have as is and convert it into cloud, that's very, very expensive compared to what we currently have. And so this is number one, it's basically saving money basically, and making it much cheaper to run. But if you want a cheaper way of running the system, you're gonna have to compromise on a lot of flexibility that we have, and you're gonna have to utilize a lot of the tools that exist within a cloud ecosystem. And using those tools is not necessarily going to give you the same power that you currently have with this flexible system that we currently have. So you're gonna have to give up a lot of flexibility and a lot of power. And with the level of users and stakeholders that we work with, and the kind of results that we want to generate, it's just not for us. We don't see that happening. Like I said earlier, there are 3 use cases where you're dealing with just one data set, and it's a very specific thing the cloud might work for you. But even with that, we see a lot of agencies where they're just dealing with one data set. And when they went straight for the cloud, they didn't even think about any other solution. They went straight for the cloud, they put their data on the cloud. And when they do that, they started to realize it's very difficult, it's very expensive, and it's not sustainable to maintain the long run. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Any other?
I have a back channel question from Jennifer. So Jennifer's wondering, Portal covers the metro region, but what are the trade-offs of having an archive at that scale versus a larger scale, such as multiple states or national?
Yes. I mean, yeah, to scale would be great on a greater level.
I think the biggest issue with scaling is, I mean, again, funding. There's a lot that can be done with Portal. I mean, we can scale it to a point where we need like billions of dollars a year. So this is not a question of how much we can scale, this is a question of how much we can scale with the amount of funding that we have. And so the first question is, well, how much funding do we have? And so this is the problem, and how much do we need to scale, and then we have to figure out how can we do with what we have. And currently, with the amount of funding that we have, this is as much as we can do. With more funding, we can probably scale. Obviously, scaling in terms of technology, this is where the next generation portal that we're working on is to allow us to run as much as we can or as much as we need, which we're working on. So it might take some time. So if we're going to use the existing technologies, I don't think it's going to be as efficient as the way currently portal is. And so this is why we're working.
Anybody else? We're here, Brian?
I would love to hear more about the, you alluded to the challenge of safety data. Yeah, do you have thoughts yet on what that would look like, or what sort of data would that jurisdictions are tracking that you can incorporate?
I mean, you get, from my limited knowledge, there, and perhaps other people here can also jump in, who might be more familiar with it. They give the state data, right? You have BARD data. I think, county has their own data. Pretty sure it's something like, where does this incident happen, and which right away is in response? How do you get it? How's that information filled out? But then there's also, like, hey, there's all this data that's collected, but then, every agency does their own level of cleaning, and then that takes time, and then you have like, oh, here's the release of that data. There's also a lag in that as well. We do actually get ODOT incidents data, but that's not, that's like a lot of stuff, not just safety crashes. It's only really, if it ever happens on ODOT. It is a definite challenge to figure out how to incorporate safety data, and specifically what type of data we be incorporating. So that's what you have to focus on. If you have thoughts or comments and would like to contribute, please feel free to reach out to me.
You have the data, but you have that.
The only type of any sort of quote unquote like safety data we might have at the moment is just the data. We don't have anything else to promote that. Yeah. So, but moving forward with our next round of funding.
We have time for one last question, and it's coming from online. Are there other projects similar to Portal you're looking up to, related to the previous question? Is there any opportunity to collaborate and go for economy of scale with data from multiple regions, or even a national?
Portal, I mean, we would like to, if there's funding available. Hasn't been brought up with us any time recently. However, we do have BikePed Portal, which is the non-motorized vehicle sort of data lake, and that is on a national scale. We are working with multiple partners.
Sorry, what was the first part?
Are there other projects similar to Portal you're looking up to?
Well, funny enough is that Portal is pretty unique across the country, and so we've seen attempts to try and build something like that, but at least not something that is public. Portal is the only, as far as we're aware, the only publicly available data lake with this scale in terms of volume and variety. There are probably some data lakes that are collect maybe a specific data set, which is a much easier problem to work with. And it might be available publicly, but something that is public with this scale for all we have.
Yeah, I mean, they're private ones, right? Like the in reference one. I think they also use probe data as well. We don't have probe data. And yeah, again, it's public. You're not going to find it on a public database like that.
And it's utilized a lot by other universities in other states, and even we got requests from other countries like Turkey and Germany, so that utilize the portal data to their own research. So quite interesting.
Great, so that concludes today's seminar. You'll be receiving an email with a survey, a brief survey, and we really appreciate your feedback on that because we use it to help to improve the quality and the quantity and just the topics for our seminars. And so we do look at the data and we do use the data. So with that, let's thank Tammy and Basem.